rockets since 2001. What you never hear, what you never ever hear the Israeli spokespeople who say this telling you is how much ordnance has Israel fired into the Gaza Strip in that period. Does anybody know? Has anyone ever heard a number of how many rockets or bombs Israel has dropped on the Gaza Strip in the period during which Israel claims 8,000 projectiles have been fired from Gaza? Has anybody ever heard an Israeli spokesman tell them that? Of course not. Yes, sir.
I would imagine they probably dropped as many as it took to destroy the Katyusha rocket launching sites that were firing at them in the first place.
Well,
It's kind of a relevant question, too. Who fired first? Who keeps firing?
It's an excellent question, so let's answer it. Well, you'll remember, of course, in December 2008, Israel launched on December 27th a massive bombardment of Gaza. In the first moments of the attack, it didn't attack rocket launching sites. It attacked, the first target was a civil police training facility and a graduation ceremony for traffic cops, because as hard as it is to believe for some people, they have traffic in Gaza and it needs to be regulated by cops on the beat. So the first thing they did was bomb a graduation ceremony for 18, 19, and 20-year-old police cadets.
They also have Katyusha firing sites in those places as well, don't
Well, they didn't, because Israel never presented any evidence of that. I mean, you can't just make things up.
You're sure there weren't any there?
Well, there was an extensive international investigation.
I'm sorry.
And Israel, hold on. If I choose to take a question from the audience, I will. But do not crosstalk, please, because then it will become chaos. Okay. So, the fact is that you can't just make things up. The Israel bombed in Gaza the Ministry of Education, the Legislative Council building, in fact, the only democratically elected legislature in the Arab world at the time. It bombed almost every police station. It bombed the water treatment plants. It bombed the electricity infrastructure, 90% of the electricity infrastructure. It destroyed irrigation equipment. And you cannot say, you can say, of course, it would be very convenient if every one of these was a rocket launching site. That would make it very easy and conscience-free, because then we don't have to worry about the reality of what happened. But who fired first? That's the question you asked. And Israel argues, of course, that all of this bombardment of Gaza is self-defense. Well, was there an alternative to this? I'm sure you remember that on June 19th, 2008, Israel, remember, of course, doesn't negotiate with terrorists and doesn't negotiate with Hamas. Israel negotiated a ceasefire with Hamas. Israel does negotiate with Hamas, and they're negotiating with Hamas now on exchange of prisoners. They negotiated a ceasefire with Hamas that was supposed to last from June 19th until the end of December of that year, or June 26th, sorry, until December 26th, 6 months. And if you look, if I had, I thought we might have a web access to the web here, I would have put up, if I did have that, the graph from the Israeli Foreign Ministry's website showing rocket fire from Gaza in 2008. And what you see is that after the ceasefire is signed, rocket fire falls almost to zero. And the Israeli Foreign Ministry tells us, we have an article about this quoting the Israeli sources on the Electronic Intifada website, that Hamas, that the rockets that were fired in that period, a couple, a very small number, were not fired by Hamas. And in fact, Hamas was trying to stop the rocket fire in order to keep its side of the ceasefire. Then what happened? Rocket fire started to go up again after November 5th. Why? Do you know why? Do you know why?
Well, I imagine the ceasefire ended.
No, it was supposed to last till December 26th.
Well, I wasn't on that side, so I don't know why they started firing rockets.
Well, if you were on the Israeli side, you might know that Israel launched an attack. Israel launched an attack on November 4th, which killed 6 people in Gaza. And Israel refused to renew the ceasefire, even though Hamas was saying we would renew it. So, if Israel wanted to prevent rocket fire from Gaza, it wasn't necessary to bomb half the schools in Gaza. In fact, of the 640 schools, let me give you the statistics. 640 schools in Gaza, 280 were damaged and 18 were completely destroyed. That wasn't necessary. Israel could simply have renewed the ceasefire. It wasn't necessary to kill 164 students and 12 teachers in the government schools, and another 86 children, 3 teachers in the UN-run schools. None of that was necessary. All Israel had to do was agree to renew the ceasefire. Now, let's just, I'm not going to hold that till the Q&A because we've taken more time than I wanted to on that. But more importantly, the imprisonment of people of Gaza, even if the rocket fire were the real issue, and it isn't, doesn't explain the other measures that Israel has taken. What does explain them is the documents that were released by the Israeli government to the Israeli human rights group Gisha, the Legal Center for Freedom of Movement. And you can find these on the web. They were just released a couple of weeks ago, October 21st. And what the Israeli government's documents say is that there is a policy of deliberate reduction for basic goods in the Gaza Strip. In other words, a calculated policy of collective punishment of the population. And what I found particularly chilling was how they calculate sort of the daily calories of Palestinians and keep the food supply at a bare minimum. This is quoting from Gisha. The documents contain a series of formulas created by the Defense Ministry to compute product inventory. The calculations are presumed to allow COGAT, that's the acronym for the occupation authorities, to measure what is called the length of breath. The formula states that if you divide the inventory in the Gaza Strip by the daily consumption needs of residents, you will get the number of days it will take for residents of Gaza to run out of that basic product. Or in other words, until their length of breath runs out. In other words, it was a deliberate policy, still in place. It is a deliberate policy of keeping a civilian population on the very edge. According to Gisha Director Sari Bashi, instead of considering security concerns on the one hand and the rights and needs of civilians in Gaza on the other, Israel banned glucose for biscuits and fuel needed for regular supply of electricity, paralyzing normal life in Gaza and impairing the moral character of the state of Israel. Now, you'll know Israel had all these lists of what was allowed and what was not. The list was secret. So that's what the documents say, that we have a list of banned products, but it's secret. So if you're a business person in Gaza, you don't know what you're allowed to import. Chocolate was one of the things that was banned, and cumin. I'm not aware of any of the Qassam rockets that were fired being loaded with chocolate or cumin warheads. And from the UN, that to this day, with the massive deliberate destruction in Gaza, you still see almost no reconstruction. Israel continues to prevent construction supplies from coming into Gaza, and almost none of the schools that were bombed, let alone the other facilities, water treatment, sanitation, nothing has been rebuilt. The point I want to make here is that the crime the way really to understand Gaza is it is a giant